You guys good? Frank is good. Anybody else good? All right, thank you. Be my friends. You guys be with me up here. Listen, this summer we're talking about different animals that we find in Scripture and how we can learn lessons from them. And today we're going to talk about an animal that we find in Proverbs. I love the book of Proverbs because Proverbs is this book that was written by King Solomon, and it's got all these truths and wisdom in it. And it gives us the opportunity to look at things through the eyes of God and see his wisdom for our life and his direction for our life. And the other thing I really like about it is it's a very easy read. So if you're like, hey, I want to start reading the Bible, but I don't know where to start, Proverbs is a really great place to start because it's simple, it's understandable, you don't have to figure much out. And I mean, maybe that's saying too much about myself, but I love that about the book of Proverbs. But today we're going to talk about an animal that I think most of you know pretty well. And I think there's a few of you that are like intimately connected with this animal. I personally am intimately connected with this animal. In the book of Proverbs, chapter 26, verse 11, it says this: as a dog returns to his vomit, so fools repeat their folly. Yeah, so that's a pretty vivid and gross proverb. That's what you have to look forward to if you open that book. But I think it's actually really helpful to us because we've probably all seen a dog return to its vomit, at least on one occasion, right? At my house, we have this dog named Charlie. I know he's Juan's favorite person. He's sweet and he's cute and he's a little bit neurotic. And we probably love him a little too much, but we do love him quite a lot. And I think that if the Garcia family thinks this dog's pretty perfect, but this dog, we've had other dogs, this dog throws up a lot. I think an abnormal amount, but, you know, whatever. Usually there I am, I'm holding Charlie back, and I'm cleaning up vomit with this hand so that he doesn't get to it, so he doesn't eat it. And on the rare occasion that I don't get there before he does, he totally eats it. It's disgusting. It makes my stomach turn. In fact, maybe you're wishing right now that I picked a different verse. I don't know. But I think it's safe to say that we cannot imagine ourselves mimicking this behavior. Just the thought of a dog doing that makes me want to vomit, right? And I would guess that collectively we think we're too civilized for that. We wouldn't do it. But why do you imagine that the writer chose such a vivid image of a dog returning to his vomit? I mean, we're way too smart for it, right? But this proverb assumes that we do return to our vomit. And in the second line of it, it makes a comparison that I feel is a little shocking, but it says that when we return to our vomit, not if, when we return to our own folly or foolishness, it's the same as when the dog returns to his vomit. So just to clarify, when the Bible's talking about folly or foolishness, it's talking about the sin that we sometimes engage in. And by sin, it's like just when you're missing the mark, when you're not living up to the glory that God has for you, when like the thing that God would have you do is here and you're over here, that's when you're missing the mark. But when we engage in and we keep going back to the same destructive behaviors over and over again, when we're doing that thing that's in opposition to our gut, that's our folly, that's our foolishness. The thing that goes against the beauty and the greatness that God would have us engage in. Hopefully, when we find ourselves in those situations, we repent. And we turn away and we do something new. We do something different. We follow God's commands for our lives. Then hopefully we ask for forgiveness and we don't go back. But this verse assumes that at times we go back. It assumes we do, again and again and again. Maybe we say we're going to turn away. Maybe we even believe that next time we're not going to do the thing, right? That next time we'll resist temptation. But for some reason, at times, we just find ourselves back with our face in our vomit. Can you think of any time in your life or anything in your life that you go back to? Awesome. Someone's not telling the truth. I'll give you some examples if you can't think of anything. I'll help you jog your memory. Slander. porn, gossip, hate, hooking up with someone, lying, overeating, alcohol, drugs. Those are just a few drugs. I mean, you might have your own flavor. That's cool. But often I think sometimes we try to explain or excuse these things away, and we say things like, I slipped up, because we want to make it like a little more palatable. And so we frame it as a mistake. It's a mistake. We downplay the seriousness of our choices because it feels better to act like it's an accident than to say we just did it, right? But let's be honest, like, we don't slip into things. I don't think. Like, we make choices, and often we're headfirst into foolishness. Like, physically or mentally, we decided to do the thing. Like, we don't slip into a lie. This is one of my favorite ones. You plan. I mean, if you're a good liar, people, you plan it. You practice it. You work it out in the mirror. You don't slip into a lie. You don't slip into hooking up with people. You downloaded the app. You know what I'm saying? Or maybe we say, I'm just struggling. I'm struggling with this thing. But this morning I'd like you to consider, are you struggling with that thing you know is vomit? Or are you struggling with the surrender and the submission that God is calling you into? It's just a question. You can ponder it. Have you ever considered that the thing you're struggling with is not the certain behavior? And that when you say that, you're letting yourself off the hook because the thing you're actually struggling with is surrender. When we return to the things that God tells us are foolish, the struggle is less with the thing and more with our own desire to just do what we want to do. Like, how many of you just want to do what you want to do? Not me. Oh my gosh, I'm a disaster, right? Another way we might explain our foolishness away is to say, I'm just having a hard time right now. You don't know how it is. I'm having a hard time. And we say this, and I think we say it because it implies that this circumstance is completely out of my control. I'm having a hard time. I don't know, what could I possibly do about it? I couldn't make another choice if I wanted to. And I agree, there's definitely hard times. Like, the Bible tells us you're going to have hard times. There's trouble in this world. So I don't want to say there's no hard times. But how we choose to act and respond to life is something that we have complete jurisdiction over in Christ. So please don't hear me say that it's easy and you just choose, because it's hard, but it's simple. It's not easy, but you can do it. It's simple. It takes real intention to choose the glorious things that you were made for. I think as a culture, we say, I'm having a hard time because it elicits sympathy. Because people are like, oh, I'm so sorry you're having a hard time. They understand it because they're having a hard time, right? I think it's good to admit when you're having a hard time. But I also think it's good to be super clear about what the hard time's about. It's about the thing you're having time. It's about the vomit, right? Often we say it in relationship to things that aren't working, that are self-induced. Like, there's plenty of hard times that are not self-induced. Trust me. People get sick. Bad things happen. Those things are not the things I'm talking about. I'm referring to things like, I'm in too much debt, so I'm having a really hard time with my finances. That's a result of choices. You lied to the people you love, so you're having a hard time in relationships. These are the kind of things I'm talking about when you say, you withheld forgiveness, so you're sitting in a pile of bitterness. You ate some vomit, and now you're having a hard time digesting it. That's what I'm talking about. Because the scriptures guarantee you're going to have hard times, like I already said. But we take on extra hard times. We load ourselves up when we return to our foolishness. And the thing I love about Proverbs is it gives us this cause and effect wisdom. If this, then that, right? It tells us very plainly, this is like this. It's super clear and easy to understand. Proverbs doesn't make us figure it out. It tells us what's true in a plain way, and I love it for that reason. Give me the facts, right? But with Charlie, if I'm paying attention, I had to get back to Charlie. If I'm paying attention, I can see the whole cycle coming. I can see his body getting ready to vomit if I'm paying attention. And it's obvious it's going to happen, probably on the carpet, not on the tile, because Why? He does the same thing every time he throws up, and I know what comes next. I know I need to get there. I need to get him away and clean it up, or he will go for it. And we are not that different. We are almost as predictable as Charlie. I wish I had a picture of him because he's so cute. But if we're paying attention, if we turn our thoughts and our actions, if we're in tune to them, we can see and we can predict the entire outcome. You know when you return to your foolishness, it always turns out the same way. It's not a surprise. But if we don't stop or change what we're doing, if we don't interrupt the narrative, then we know the cycle. We're going to end up fighting to put our face right in the middle of our own vomit. We fight for it, but we need something to break the cycle. The psalmist says this in Psalm 107, 10 through 16. It says, "Some sat in darkness, in utter darkness, prisoners suffering in iron chains, because they rebelled against God's commands and despised the plans of the Most High. He subjected them to bitter labor. They stumbled, and there was no one to help. Then they cried to the Lord in their trouble, and he saved them from their distress. He brought them out of darkness, the utter darkness, and broke away their chains. Let them give thanks to the Lord for his unfailing love and his wonderful deeds for mankind, for he breaks down gates of bronze and cuts through iron bars." And then in Ephesians it says this, "Have nothing to do with the fruitless deeds of darkness, but rather expose them. It is shameful even to mention what the disobedient do in secret, but everything exposed by the light becomes visible, and everything that is illuminated becomes a light. This is why it is said, 'Wake up, sleeper, rise from the dead, and Christ will shine on you.' Be very careful then how you live, not as unwise, but as wise, making the most of every opportunity, because the days are evil. Therefore, do not be foolish," vomit chasers, I added that. That's not in the Bible. "But understand what the Lord's will is." Look at you guys. Invite Jesus into your vomit. He's up for it. He can handle it. He's like me. He'll clean it up. Invite some people into your vomit. Not because you're having a hard time, because you need some support. You need some accountability. Ask for it. Pursuing a life that's lived in the light is an ongoing endeavor. You're going to be doing it forever. You're not going to arrive. Keep asking God and keep asking community to be in that fight with you, to pull your face out of the vomit when you end up there, because you will end up there. And I know this proverb is hard to hear, and it is meant to shock us. It's supposed to. It's meant to have us look at the fact that when we return to our own folly and sin, it's gross. Out of love, God wants you to have a visceral reaction to your foolishness, so that when you can really understand and see what you're choosing, when you return over and over and over to the same destructive behavior that robs you of life. Hopefully, the image of the dog shakes up our thinking a little and our behavior enough that we choose the light over and over again, that we choose to bring Jesus and community along with us to keep us from returning to the vomit that we sometimes find so irresistible. So in this summer series, we're going to take a time after each speaker to do a couple questions. And so if you're online, you can join in the chat with Phil on those. But this is the question I have for you guys today. What is the foolishness you find yourself returning to? And how can you invite God and community into supporting you, into choosing life over vomit? Thank you, guys.
All right, go ahead and bring your conversations to a close. Those of you who are online, you can hop off the chat there, and we're going to come back together. We're going to come back together here for our second conversation around the next animal that we find in the scriptures. One of our tenets here, our values, part of our mission statement, even here at Humanity Church, is that we are a people that are committed to live by faith. And here's the thing that's interesting to me, is that it's not like some people live by faith and other people don't live by faith. Living by faith is not just for people of faith. That every single one of us are people that live by faith in some way, shape, or form. In fact, living by faith is actually a critical part of what it means to be human. It's part of what allows us to keep moving forward. There's small acts of faith that we engage every single day. I mean, simply sitting in your chair was an act of faith. Getting in your car was an act of faith. Putting that food, wherever it came from, in your mouth this morning was an act of faith. Believing that it wasn't going to poison you. There's all kinds of small acts of faith that we take every single day to move us forward. And then there are actually large areas of faith that we live in that we mostly keep ourselves blind to, because if we were constantly aware of them, it would drive us crazy. Like not knowing where the economy is going, or not knowing if we're going to have a job in the next year, or not knowing the status of our relationships, or not knowing what that other person's going to do or not do. There's all kinds of areas of faith that we step into that we trick ourselves into thinking that it's a certain thing to keep us sane in life. But we are people of faith. And every single major decision that we step into in life requires some type of leap of faith. And here's the thing, is we actually have no idea what tomorrow will bring. We do not know what the next day is going to look like or who will be with us in that day. And we cannot, as much as we would like to, predict the future. We can't, nor can we control every single outcome of our lives and our kids' lives and our friends' lives and the world around us. And this horrifies most of us. The reality that most of this life is out of control and most of this life is a giant leap of faith. We don't enjoy that idea too much, at least in this existence, mostly because we as human beings are bent towards survival. That's what we're actually designed to step into. We have a drive to keep ourselves alive. Whatever will keep us safe, whatever will keep us alive, we tend to design our lives around those things. And so when we look out at the world and we see an opportunity to risk, to step into a space of faith, to take the leap, it's not very exciting for most of us. In fact, for most of us, we pull back or we try to figure out how to mitigate all of the risk that is involved in the leap of faith. We calculate all the risk that's involved in the relationship and our finances and our faith and the people around us and what we are called to give ourselves to, and we attempt to control it and mitigate it as much as possible so that we can have the outcome that we want. How many of you notice that we do this in our relationships? That we attempt to mitigate all the risk involved in the people we love. We gauge whether or not we will even have a conversation with someone based on if we believe we can survive the conversation. Isn't that crazy? I mean, how many of you have refused to have conversations with someone knowing that on the other side you will still be alive? Like your heart will still be beating, you'll still be breathing, but you refuse to have the conversation because right over here it feels like you're going to die if you have the conversation. If you engage that arena, if you have some space in the middle of that. And so here's the thing. In those spaces, most of us are not evaluating whether or not we are going to survive. We're calculating whether or not something else is going to survive, like our control in the relationship, or our level of comfort that we live in the relationship, or our ego in the relationship, or our need to have things turn out a certain way survives in the middle of this. See, when we find ourselves bent towards survival, when we are called into these spaces of faith and risk and stepping out into the unknown, when we avoid those and are geared more towards how can I survive in this life, what it ultimately lets us know is that we don't actually believe that God is who he says he is. That at the end of the day, God isn't going to provide if I'm going to live a life of faith. So we start living a mediocre life. And our relationships start to feel bland, and our life starts to feel shallow, and our existence starts to feel not very exciting. And we wonder, where is God in the midst of all of this? And so we would rather settle for surviving rather than stepping into the exciting, faith-filled life that God has for us. The problem is, of course, that life requires a lot of trust that he will provide in the midst of this. And we do this with almost every single arena in our life, not just with our relationships, but we settle for surviving in our emotional state. Well, it's not too bad. It's not really what I want, but as long as it's not unmanageable, I'll stay here. We do this with our finances. Let's not get too crazy. Let's make sure we have enough set away, but we can put a little away here, but don't give too much because then we might actually find ourselves without. We do this in our careers, with our current reality, all kinds of areas. We are attempting to mitigate risk because we wonder if we step out in faith, will God actually provide for us in the middle of this? And then we wonder, where is God in all this mundane life that I have created for myself? Here's the problem, is that when God dreamt you up, when God decided that you needed to be on this planet, I don't imagine that his highest longing for your life was that you would simply survive this life. I don't imagine that when he dreamt you up, that his highest calling on your existence was that at the end of the day, you could say, I survived. Here I am. I'm still breathing. See, I imagine that when God dreamt you up, he longed for you to be filled with passion and life, and that your life would be a continual step into the unknown, filled with purpose as you take the next leap of faith that he calls you into. But that life requires risk. It requires you letting go of the comfort of the known and the predictable and the mundane and stepping into this space where God has to provide, or else you're left without, and life doesn't show up the way that we thought it could be. So it shouldn't actually be a surprise that if God longs for you to live this passion-filled life, filled with hope and love and beauty, that when you step into a relationship with Jesus, that he would also ask you to step into a relationship with risk, with trust, with faith, that he would call you to live a life that's constantly taking the next leap that he's calling you into, a greater level of trust in him to provide in the midst of the leap that he's calling you into. See, when God says, leap off the cliff, there has to be a trust that he will catch us in the midst of that. And if we are unwilling to live a life of faith, survival will always win out. And there was this moment in the scriptures with this king named Ahab. And he was described as this. There was a lot of talk about Ahab, but one of the ways he was described was doing more evil in the eyes of God than any of those who had gone before him. Could you imagine being that dude in the scriptures, right? Like, how do we describe him? Well, he did more evil than anyone else who came before him. That's how we describe him here. And God sends this messenger, Elijah, to give him a message in the midst of this chaos that he's creating and all the people that are buying into his chaos in 1 Kings chapter 17, starting in verse 1. And it says this, Now Elijah, the Tishbite from Tishbe in Gilead, said to Ahab, As the Lord, the God of Israel lives, whom I serve, there will be neither dew nor rain in the next few years except at my word. So God sends Elijah to basically tell these people, you are not going to have any water for the next few years, and there will be an extreme drought on your land because of this evil that you and your people are doing. Now, this wasn't exactly like the feel-good message that I'm sure Elijah wanted to bring to the king in this moment. This was an incredibly inconvenient message that Elijah gets to bring to him because, one, the king could do whatever he wanted to Elijah after giving that message, right? He could literally shoot the messenger if he needed to. And I'm sure this wasn't like an exciting message that Ahab gets. So Elijah's here going, I have no idea what's going to happen after I deliver this message to him. But here's the other thing. Elijah's living in this land along with Ahab. So when Elijah says there's going to be no water for you, there's also no water for him. There's no food, there's no provision, and so he is essentially saying, we're all gonna be without water. This is incredibly inconvenient, right? This is a little bit like saying, you know what? I'm gonna get back at my roommate by leaving the gas on tonight. See if he likes that, right? Because you're all just gonna end up poisoned. And this is where Elijah finds himself. He's incredibly inconvenient in this message. And I'm sure it would have been incredibly easy for Elijah to say, yeah, this is not actually the message that I'm supposed to give. This is not me. This couldn't be from God. I'm not really interested in that. This is not gonna be very safe in this moment. because I imagine Elijah was going, this is a huge risk to share this message with the king. And I don't know if I'm gonna be provided for in the midst of this risk, in the midst of this jump. And I'm sure a ton of questions came flooding into his head when God asks him to give this message. Will I literally survive delivering this message? How will I eat? How will I drink? How will I be provided for? Where will my provisions come from if I'm stuck in this land where I've declared that there will be no water until I speak out in the middle of this? See, when God calls us to live a life of faith, to live a life of service to others in our faith, I'm not just talking about living a risky life for the sake of risk. I'm talking about obeying the voice of God when he says to step out of your comfort, to step out of your control, to step out of your need to have things look a certain way and serve the world with your faith and with your risk. I am sure these same conversations come flooding into our head. These same questions come flooding into us. Will I survive? How will I get what I need if I release what I know over here? How will I be able to sustain myself? Is God actually who he says he is on the other side? And will he actually provide for me in the jump, in the leap, in the risk, in the trusting, in the middle of this? And when God calls us into a life out of faith, here's the thing. I wonder how many of us resist stepping out in faith because all of these questions just keep piling up. They just keep stacking up one after the other. Now, here's the crazy thing is all the answers that you're looking for are on the other side of the leap. They're in the jump that those answers will be given to you, but you will not know them until you step out in faith, until you actually decide that your trust will be placed in him. But it's in the leap, it's in the jump, it's in the trust, it's in the stepping out where life is found, where that passion is built, where hope is actually actualized in the middle of this. It's in the embracing of the mystery of what's on the other side. That provision comes in the midst of it, but you will not know it until you take the leap. So Elijah delivers this message to Ahab, and it continues. Then the word of the Lord came to Elijah. Leave here and turn westward and hide in Kerith Ravine east of the Jordan. You will drink from the brook, and I will direct the ravens to supply you with food there. So he did what the Lord had told him. He went to the ravine east of the Jordan, and he stayed there. And the ravens brought him bread and meat in the morning, and bread and meat in the evening. And he drank from the brook. See, it was in the midst of Elijah saying, I'm gonna take this leap. I have no idea what's gonna come on this other side, that God says, I'm gonna send ravens to feed you in the morning after night. Now that's a cool restaurant concept right there, right? I mean, I know it's all about like the robots delivering you your meat now. I think we should have restaurants with ravens bringing little packages to your table, right? See, what I love, it isn't until Elijah decided, all right, I will obey the Lord, I will bring this message to the king, I will give his word, I will take the risk, that it's on the other side of the risk that God provides in the middle of this. See, here's what I think shows up in my life so often, and I think for so many of us, is we want God to provide before the risk. We want God to provide before the leap. We want God to provide before trust is actually necessary. And so we find ourselves saying, God, I will totally go talk to Elijah. You just set up a storehouse of food for me over here, and then I'll totally go talk to him. You organize everything so that I know that it will work out in my favor. Assure me it will work out, and then I will take the leap. Make sure all of my financial provisions are made. Make sure all the relationships are set up. Make sure I can see exactly where I'm going, exactly what I have, exactly what I don't have in the midst of all of this. Change their heart before I have the conversation so there's no risk of me being in trouble. Take away any possibility of failure in my risk. In other words, take all the risk out of faith, and then I will step out in faith. Ever been there before? See, but this is how good God is in this. He tells Elijah after the risk, he says, look, you've taken the risk. Now I will give you all the provision. I will give you everything that you need now that you have stepped out in faith and stepped in this. And he tells Elijah, here's where you can find water, and I will send ravens to feed you. A few weeks ago, I found myself on Raven TikTok. I don't know how I got there, but I found myself there. All these videos about ravens, about crows. And one of the things that I did not know about crows that I found out from Raven TikTok is that crows actually, when you are in a relationship with a crow, they will actually bring you gifts. That's actually like part of their makeup. Like, I don't know what they do, but there's all these people who have decided they're gonna like feed ravens. They'll put like a nut out for them or some seeds, and then the ravens will bring back like a spoon that they found in the forest, or like a flower, or they'll bring a beetle back or something, but the raven will leave gifts for the person wherever they need in the middle of this, right? That they were actually designed to provide something in exchange for something else. And here Elijah finds himself in need, and he's in this relationship with the ravens, right? And I imagine he's like, ooh, what's coming today? We've got some sourdough and we got some filet mignon. This is awesome. Could we get some rye and some mustard later with some parm? I don't know. But here he's being provided for by the ravens. Now, here's the thing. I imagine that never in a million years would have Elijah said, you know what's going to happen after I make this leap? Birds are going to feed me meat and bread in the wilderness. He would have never been able to devise that up. He would have never been able to strategize himself into that place, that he would literally be like Cinderella in the desert with the birds bringing him food, right? But because he served the God who even has the birds at his disposal, all his needs got met in this act of faith and him willing to stand in what is true and what was beautiful and what was honorable in the midst of this. And in the leap, in the jump, in the risk, it is our job to obey, and it is God's job to provide. And see, that's the thing that gets us hung up on. We keep thinking about the provision when God's just like, no, all you have to be concerned about is obedience. If you could get everything else out of the way, I will provide. I will make sure you have what you need if you're willing to take the next step. And here's the beautiful thing, is he will use any means necessary beyond what you could ever ask or imagine to make sure that you are provided for in the midst of that, even if he will use the birds to send you food. God will make sure that you are taking care of us. I wonder how many people are waiting for the risk to be removed before they live a life of faith, waiting for provision before it's actually even needed, waiting for God to move before they're willing to, waiting for their emotions to suddenly match their calling and to step into this. And here's the tragedy, is that if we are not careful, we will live out our days. And at the end of our days on this planet, we will ask ourselves, where was God in this mundane, average, ordinary life that I lived? Why did I never get to experience the miraculous? Why did I never get to experience something so breathtaking that I can't even explain what just happened? And the deeper tragedy might be not that we just live a mundane life, but that the world around us never actually gets the gift that we were designed to give in our living by faith. See, Elijah, in this moment, in his risk and his willing to go anyways, he gives a gift to Ahab and the people and reminding them of who God is. And the world will never be the same. See, your risk, your living by faith, your taking the leap is actually not about you. God's like, I got the provision covered. It is about you being willing to demonstrate to the world around you how powerful and how providing God is for us. That if you call yourself a follower of Jesus, living a life of mediocrity is not an option. That living by faith and taking the leap and stepping out in trust is the only way to live fully alive in the life that we were called to live, that we know echoes inside of us. And see, we will never know if we're unwilling to, that God will even use the ravens to feed us, if he must, to make sure that we are provided for. My grandfather has a lot of sayings that he's instilled in me over the years, but one of the things that constantly comes back to my mind that he has told me over and over and over again. He says, it is the obligation of the servant to serve and obey his master, but it is the job of the master then to provide everything the servant needs to accomplish the task. It is our job just to obey. It is his job to provide. Therefore, the servant must never look for a second source of supply. In other words, you can lay down your supply of control. You can lay down your supply of strategy and needing to get it all right. You can lay down your need to have everything figured out before it happens and simply step into a place of obedient risk, following your master in serving the world around you. So here's what I'd like for you to do, to talk to 2 or 3 people next to you as we close out our gathering. What is the leap of faith that God is calling you to take right now in your life? Here's the thing. I actually find that most people know exactly what it is right off the bat. So I'm going to ask you to take the first thing, whatever that leap of faith is. It could be a relationship. It could be a conversation that you need to have. It could be a financial conversation. It could be something internally that you need to confess or to get help with or support alongside of, whatever it may be for you. What is the act of faith that God is calling you to take? And what is the act of service to him that he longs for you that you may be resisting because you can't see provision right now? Maybe you're like, I don't know if this is going to turn out. I don't know if God's going to provide. I don't know if I'm going to have what I need, whatever it may be. But what is that? And share that out loud. And I'm going to ask you as you're sharing it to just be willing to take that risk today. All right, find 2 or 3 people, have that conversation, and we'll wrap up our time together.